Welcome. I'm Teresa Schmidt from Sydney University. I'm also an executive member of the AVETRA committee and chair of the October Vet committee. And I'm really excited to be here with you presenting our very first event to launch our October Vet program for 2020. This evening we have Professor Liz Atkins joining us. And Liz is a Professor of Vocational Education and Social Justice at the University of Derby, UK, in the United Kingdom. Her research has focused on low attaining young people and the way in which their transitions from school to work are variously constrained and enabled by their vet program. Liz uses qualitative approaches in her research, which is theoretically informed by concepts of social justice, and in her research practice attempts to do as well as make social justice. She has published widely on issues in vet and on aspects of qualitative research, and she is co-author with Vicky Duckworth of Research Methods for Social Justice and Equity in Education, and that was published in 2019. I got my hands on a copy this year, and it is available now to purchase. Fantastic book for any emerging or even established researchers interested in education or in social justice. So I'm really thankful that Liz was able to join us here for this launching event for October Vet 2020. And this evening's event is entitled Social Justice Research and Vocational Education, a conversation with Professor Liz Atkins. Before we begin today, Liz, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we're meeting and viewing this video today. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and pay my respects to all traditional custodians and First Nations people watching this recording today with us. Now, Liz, I'm going to begin by asking you to give us a bit of a background about yourself. I'd like to know how you became interested in social justice research for education. What brought you to this point?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for the great endorsement for the book that you just gave us. And actually we had a great time reading it. So what brought me to this? I guess you could say really that's very much about my life history. And I did write about this actually in an earlier book, which was published a long time ago in 2009 and was based on my doctoral studies. And it's really about the fact that I grew up with a stigmatised disability. Beyond that, I then went into psychiatric nursing. That was my first career. And if you work in psychiatry, you come across some of the most disadvantaged and depressed people that you will meet anywhere in society. And after I left nursing, I moved into working, teaching in further education. And as we know, many of our students in further education come from significantly disadvantaged groups. And so really it was working with, through all that, with those different groups of people that brought me to see the impact really of disadvantage, and particularly through working in further education, what you would call TAFE in Australia, really brought home to me the very different opportunities and lack of opportunities that different individuals face because of their life circumstances. And what that meant to me was that, that there had to be a better way of doing things. And through my own reading and learning, I came to have a deeper understanding of social justice and the implications of social justice. And so that was those were the sort of concepts that I opted to use in my research and indeed in my teaching practice and work more broadly.
Thanks, Liz. So from that lived experience and work experience and that evolution. How then, what led you to the writing of the book? Why did you why did you write this wonderful book?
Well, as you know, it was co-authored with my colleague and good friend Vicky Duckworth. And Vicky, like me, has got an interesting past. Like me, she was a nurse. She came from quite a disadvantaged background herself. So we had this shared interest in social justice. And it was an integral part of our commitment to our research. And it was something we talked about often. And so I suppose really the book was a natural conclusion to all that. And I had been in conversation with a publisher about writing a book around the use of social justice as a concept in qualitative research. And when that became a sort of invitation to put forward a proposal for a book, Vicky was the obvious person to co-author that book because, as I say, we have these shared interests that we've talked about for many years, actually.
So I wonder then, why social justice rather than, for example, something like gender?
Right, well, that's an interesting question. Obviously, I'm very concerned about issues of gender, but I'm concerned about issues of social class. I'm concerned about issues of race, issues associated with disability, and so on and so forth. And what social justice does for me is that it crystallises those forms of intersectionality. It recognises that somebody isn't just a young person, or a young person who is black, or a young person who is black and poor, but that all those characteristics intersect in different ways according to the individual circumstances, where they are at that moment in time. And concepts of social justice, for me, allow me to understand individuals in the context of those personal circumstances, those particular characteristics. And so they give me a better understanding of intersectionality. So I would say that helps me have a more nuanced understanding of issues such as gender, for example, because in my research, I look at those very much at an individual level, because I think for me, part of social justice and doing research, which might be argued to be socially just, is about recognising individuals and not homogenising people according to particular characteristics. So not assuming that all young people are the same, or all, disabled people are the same with the same needs, or that all women are the same, and so on and so forth. We have to see people as individuals and understand the ways in which different characteristics intersect and mediate their lives.
Thanks, Liz. So we're talking about social justice, and it's a term that's used frequently now. We hear the term used a lot. How can we know whether a particular cause or an issue is socially just?
That's a really challenging question, and it's really difficult to answer. I think it's true to say that social justice, whilst it's a theoretical concept which is used in research, has become a term which is widely abused as well as widely used. And I think that is a matter of concern. And we hear of social justice warriors, for example. We hear people from all different pressure groups using social justice as a sort of rallying cry. and those individuals may represent groups which in their own way are oppressed, but very often those groups can come in, you know, those arguments can come into tension with one another. And one of the things that concerns me about the use of the term is that often it's the people that shout loudest who come out on top. And for me, that's not about social justice, because that then simply becomes another form of oppression. And similarly in politics, I mean, I can't comment on Australia, but certainly in the UK, if we look at policy documents from the two major political parties, Labour and Conservatives, over the past 20 years, I can pick you out any number of policy documents that both say that what they're trying to do is create a more socially just education and economic system. Now, they can't both be trying to do that because their ideologies are quite different. And this is another example of what I mean. So I think that whilst I advocate for social justice, I also recognise that it's a problematic term and that it's something that we need to think about quite carefully, rather than, as I say, just using it as a rallying cry without any discrimination.
So perhaps you could elaborate a little more on how you understand social justice.
Okay. I'll start with a quote. This is one of my favourite quotes, and it's a pretty old one because it was Aristotle that said this. What Aristotle said was, "It is thought that justice is equality, and so it is, but not for all persons, only for those that are equal." And so that sums up for me that some people are more equal than others, and therefore social justice is about thinking about that and how we can remedy that in some way. And for that reason, to me, social justice is about morality and it's about ethics. You know, it's about the morality of the fact that we have groups within our countries, because the UK and Australia are two of the wealthiest countries in the world, and yet we have people in both those countries who live in significant poverty. We have people with far less access to a good education simply because of where they live. And so those people are far less equal. And to me, that's immoral in the context of the 20th century and a wealthy country. And it's something that we should be working to remediate. I think that social justice is about respect. It's about respect for the individual. And this is something that I've argued consistently through all my work. There are certain groups, and you mentioned my interest in low attainment. Low attaining young people receive no respect from society, similarly to people working in low pay, low skill work, who traditionally have had no respect in society. Actually, COVID has made that more apparent because people have suddenly realised that actually you need people that do the cleaning, and you need people that are going to serve in the supermarkets when nobody else can go out, because these are jobs that are really essential. And I've argued consistently through all my work that we should be valuing people as human beings and not in terms of their economic value or their potential economic value. So I guess you could say those are the things that for me are at the heart of social justice, and that's really what it means to me. I think it's also, drawing on the literature, true to say that that's a personal view, and it's something that Mo Griffiths has described as dialogic, and it's something that Minogue described as a family of ideas. Mo Griffiths also referred to different voices. So there is this, you know, there's a lot of literature on it, and the emphasis of that literature is around the fact that this is something that's open to debate. Although the other thing that I like, if you like, from the literature comes from Christians, and it's actually in one of the Denzin and Lincoln books on qualitative research. I think it's The Landscape of Qualitative Research. And he talks about social justice as being related to the common good, which is one of the ways in which I understand it. But he argues that the common good's only available to us in a personal form. So it's something within each individual. And another quote here, he says, it has its ground and inspiration in a social ontology of the human. And so what that would mean, or what that does mean for me, is that it's very much a personal endeavour, and that we all have a responsibility, if you like, to try and make this world a better place and leave it a better place when we do come to leave it.
So then, considering that we are, thanks, considering that many of our audience will be educators and researchers, how does this relate to education research? How is it relevant to that?
Well, I think it's really relevant to educational research, and the reason for that is that almost all educational research is concerned with different forms of inequality. And, you know, my background's further education, vet, and so on, but you can make the same arguments about primary or secondary or higher education. If you're wanting, you know, people in any sector to do better in their education, to fulfill their potential and so on, they have to have the circumstances to enable them to do that. And for that reason, most educational research is actually about inequality. And if you're concerned about inequality and you want to make that better and level the playing field a little bit, then you have to be concerned with social justice, with creating a more just and equitable society, and a more just and equitable education system. And I think it's very difficult to disentangle your education system from your society, because the one reflects the other.
Thanks, Liz. So in the book, you differentiate between socially just research and research for social justice. Do you want to just highlight the differences of those?
Sure, it's a fine distinction, but it was something that Vicky and I felt was a really important distinction. So research for social justice is research which has social justice as an aim. So it wants to make things better, it wants to improve things in some way, and that might be a little change within a classroom, or it might be a huge system-wide change. And actually, that doesn't matter. But that research, whatever it is and whatever form it takes, is about making things better. So that would be research for social justice. However, what we would describe as socially just research would be research that during the research process, as part of the research process, is trying to make social justice. So it's trying to, or it is, involving the young people who are part of the research in the control and conduct of the research, in the planning of it, in the way it's implemented. And so the whole research project becomes a collegial endeavour. And in doing that, in giving away, in the research giving away control of the research to those who traditionally would be researched upon, that creates a much more equal relationship, and also puts those young people in a position where they can, to some extent, take control of an investigation into their own lives and what that might find, and what it might uncover. So that kind of empowerment, we would argue, is research which is socially just, or seeks to be socially just in its conduct.
Thanks, Liz. I'm interested to know more about the Guernsey College research program. So this is where you've been able to put some of these concepts into practice. So I'm sure that, you know, this would be helpful if our listeners could learn more about that.
Right, yes, the Guernsey project. This is a most amazing project that I've been working on with colleagues at Guernsey College now for about 4 years. And the project started because colleagues in Guernsey, and for those people who are watching who maybe don't know, Guernsey is one of the Channel Islands. It's nearer to France than to England. It's not actually part of the UK. It's actually a crown dependency, and it has its own government, its own legislature, and very much its own culture. So in many respects, it's quite different from England. And that's just an aside, because if anybody from Guernsey watches this, it'd be really important to them that I acknowledge that. And anyway, the colleagues in Guernsey were concerned about their level 1 provision. So level 1 in the UK equates approximately to certificate 1 in Australia, and the sort of programmes that are on offer share more with VETIS than other forms of VET. And they are classroom based and tend to involve quite a lot of writing and that sort of activity. So then they're not actually ideal for young people who have effectively failed in school, because young people in the UK and Guernsey follows the same system, take GCSEs at 16, which are level 2, and then if they don't achieve those, they will then go effectively backwards onto a level 1 programme, and they have this limited sort of choice of vocational programmes. And Guernsey College were concerned about the provision, that it wasn't exciting and it wasn't engaging, and it wasn't really doing much to remedy the experiences that the young people had before, which had led them to being on a level 1 programme in the first place. So we got together, and there's very little research in this area, but we worked out a radically different curriculum and spent a year doing that. And the curriculum does involve a vocational programme, and we retained a qualification because the young people like that, and that is a core, but it's all offered on a project-based learning sort of approach. English and maths are part of the programme, and the young people do those at the level at which they're currently functioning, irrespective of what that is. They have careers education and guidance, because research shows that they have similar aspirations to their higher attaining peers, but they don't have a roadmap of how to get there, and they don't have role models and so on. And significantly, what these young people are missing is access to the sort of opportunities and experiences that their more advantaged peers have. And that might just be things like going to the cinema, or going out for a meal, or going on an outward bound trip, something like that. So the whole programme at Guernsey College is wrapped in enrichment activities, so that these young people can be given some of those opportunities. And it's something we feel very strongly about. So for example, if you've never been to the cinema, you can't envisage a career in the arts and media, because it doesn't exist for you. So these are the sorts of things really that we were trying to put right. And once the programme was implemented, the curriculum was implemented, I should say. Since then, we have tracked the first young people to go through the programme, and we've tracked them into further education and into work, and we've continued to monitor them, because our aim was not just to develop a more socially just curriculum which provided access to greater opportunities, but we also wanted to be certain that the outcomes of that were socially just in themselves. So, you know, we wanted the young people to come out with better employment opportunities and more secure employment opportunities, and to be able to access further education. And we've followed the young people now for 3 years, and we've followed subsequent cohorts, and we've actually had really, really good results. So the number of young people who are retained on the programme has risen exponentially. The number of young people who have progressed into further education has risen. Many have gone into work, into apprenticeships and so on, and have done extremely well. And one of the things that we were most concerned about was the young people becoming NEET, so not in education, employment or training. I'm not sure if that's an acronym you use in Australia. And something like just over 30% were becoming NEET at the beginning of the programme, which is fairly or the beginning of the new curriculum, which is fairly typical for that level of programme in the UK. And the numbers now at the last count were down to under 10%, and we're being able to monitor those young people individually on the island and continue to support them where that's possible into employment. So overall, this has been extremely successful, and we see this as a way of making social justice for these young people, and we want to spread that. So there is a book now which is currently being written, and we're trying to disseminate the ideas in the hope that other people who are involved with low attaining youth will pick those up and apply some of them to their own programmes.
So Liz, I'm going to put you on the spot here now, knowing that you've worked and researched in Australia. Do you think that the findings from your project, that the things that you've learnt from that, do you think they'll be able to translate well to our context here?
Your context is quite different. I think people don't recognise necessarily exactly how different it is, because in the UK we have what we call broad vocational education, which is classroom based and doesn't actually give an occupational qualification. It just broadly prepares young people to work in a particular area. And our level 1 programmes form part of that broad vocational education. So I'm not sure how the sorts of ideas that we've used, which are designed around a classroom, would necessarily fit with the sort of occupational standards that you have in Australia. But I do think that they have quite a lot in common with VETIS, and I know that, you know, vetting schools and the young people who take up vetting schools are a matter of concern to researchers, to teachers and to policymakers in Australia. And I do think that's an area where those individuals might look at the research we've conducted and say, well, yes, you know, we could take those elements, because it's quite a flexible model that we've developed. We could take those elements and we could apply them in our school, in our college, you know, even in our state, except I'm not really for big scale solutions, because you lose some of the sort of individuality then. But I certainly think that it could be applied to vetting schools, yes.
Great. So we'll be looking forward to seeing that book published. So now I'm going to go back to some of our, potentially our emerging vet researchers, our vet teachers, or even our FE, our further education teachers who might be watching from the UK. For those people who might be interested in social justice, or they want to research in this area, but they're not sure where to start, what advice would you have for them?
Okay, well, first of all, I would say to those researchers, if they haven't done a bachelor's degree or maybe master's or doctoral degree, they can always do a degree, because any degree in related to education and training has got some kind of research training within it. And there's loads of fantastic universities in Australia, and you know, you can sign up and you can do such a degree. And I think that kind of formal training is important, and we should recognise it as important. But beyond that, I think that there's lots of sort of guidance out there. There are lots of books that people can use. I think it's important that the research is well planned. I think it's important that it's rigorous. I think if you're going to use social justice, you need to read about it. And I think it's important not to use sort of Google or Wikipedia, but to use reliable sources. And so I could recommend a book by me and Vicky Duckworth, which actually that book has got contributions in from many of our wonderful colleagues who wrote about the ways in which they had done research to try and make social justice, or ways in which they've done socially just research. And those narratives, I think, are really helpful to anybody who is just, you know, whose research career is in its very early stages. I think that would be really helpful. I think most importantly, as an emerging researcher, you need to be concerned with the ethics of your research. And nowadays, everybody who does any research has to go to an ethics committee, and they have to fill in a form. And one of the things that concerns me about those processes is that people fill in the form and get their approval, and they think that's an end to it. And it isn't, because the ethics of your research, making sure what you do is right and moral, should permeate every aspect of your research. And it should be something that you're thinking about all the time, above and beyond all those sorts of standard protocols. So I would say to any emerging researcher, once you've planned this rigorous project and you're clear about how it's going to work, and you've read a few books and so on, and you've familiarised yourself with social justice, then as you're actually doing the project, all the way through, you need to be asking yourself questions. Is what I'm doing moral? How might what I'm doing affect all the other people who are involved in this research? And if it's going to affect other people, in what ways might it affect them? And some of those ways may be very subtle, and some of them may be quite significant. How does my research project demonstrate respect for everybody that's participating in it? You know, so for example, in my research with low attaining youth, I've never gathered data which involves people putting pen to paper, because actually a lot of low attaining youth, yes, have good literacy skills, but many others don't. And to ask somebody to do something which they will struggle with, not only does that mean you get really poor data, but it's actually disrespectful of that person when you can find a medium which they're good at and which they enjoy to share their stories with you. Other questions, you know, how's this project collegial? Who am I working with, and who's making the decisions? And why is that individual or that group of people making the decisions? So that I think these are all questions that an emerging researcher needs, or any researcher indeed, needs to be posing to themselves as they're going through that research process and undertaking a research project.
Thanks, Liz. Just, I guess, following on from that, you talk in the book about the insider relationship and, you know, the ethical and power considerations associated with that. And I guess if we're thinking about our vet teachers, practitioners, or our further education lecturers, there is that insider relationship. So, you know, how might they manage that? And do you think that they should use that as a positive aspect, or what are the considerations around that relationship?
I think being an insider researcher can be really positive. There's, you know, and if you are researching something with your own students, for example, as a practitioner, you're in a situation that you can potentially improve. Now that's a positive. If you are doing a larger scale project, say for a master's or a doctoral degree, you've got access, and it can be really difficult to negotiate access for a research project. So there are huge benefits to doing insider research, and we shouldn't sort of forget those because they're important benefits. Excuse me. There are also challenges, I think, with doing insider research, and predominantly those are ethical considerations and considerations around power relations and the sorts of tensions that arise in terms of ethics and power relations. And by that I mean every relationship, every conversation we have has a power element involved. So if you are in the classroom with your students, you are in a more powerful position than those students to start with. Somebody who's in senior management, excuse me, somebody who's in senior management in your organisation is in a more powerful position than you, and those are very obvious power relations. But within your group of students, there will be subtle differences. There'll be somebody who's louder and more dominant in the group. There will be students who have racial differences, students who have subtle class differences. There might be a student with a particular disability. There will be gender differences. And between those individuals with those different characteristics, there will be very slight differences in terms of the power relations between them. And that can impact on the way you conduct your research. So, for example, if you do little group interviews with young people and you have somebody there who is quite dominant within the group, then you know you have to be prepared for the fact that that person may be the one that dominates the kind of data you get from that particular interview. And that's just really a very broad example. There are other sort of more significant questions, if you like, such as if you are more powerful than your participants, can your research be truly collegial? And what are the implications of that for social justice? And these are all discussions that we need to have. Your students, if your students know you and they respect you because you're their teacher, have they really given informed consent? Or have they actually said, yes, I'll do this because, you know, Liz or whoever is my teacher, and I want to do something to please that person? You know, is there that element there of wanting to please you? And then there are other considerations. You know, if you're looking at a big issue and your findings are prejudicial to your institution, how do you broach that with your senior management? So there are challenges that come from being an insider researcher, but on the other hand, you have a greater knowledge of that place where you're doing the research. And it's finding a balance, I think, between the two, and recognising the tensions between the two and acknowledging those within the research as you go through the research project.
Thanks, Liz. That was really helpful, I think, for many people who are thinking about that relationship and that tension, and, you know, knowing that obviously there's an advantage, but there are certain things that you have to be very mindful and careful of. So I guess a final question for you. I'm interested in your thoughts on what the burning issues are in education that you would like to see social justice researchers tackle in the future.
Oh, there are so many. There are so many, Teresa. I guess the overarching issue is one of inequality. For me, within that, it's low attainment. Because, and you know, there's a tension there. Everybody can't be average and everybody can't be above average. So there are always going to be some people, if we're going to test everybody, and that's a whole other debate. If we're going to test everybody, there are always some people who will come out below average. And I think my concern, and an area that needs more research, is to find ways in which those young people can receive an education that allows them to engage with society in a really positive way and move into occupations that they will find fulfilling and that will sustain them throughout their lives. And I think that's really important when we look at the numbers. Now, I can't give you the Australian numbers, and I recognise that the UK numbers are of a bit less interest because we've got such a huge population relative to Australia. But in the UK, every year, around 500,000 young people take post-16 exams, and 10% of those move on to programmes below level 2. So that's about 50,000. So when I'm talking about, you know, low attainment, seriously low attainment, in my own country, I'm talking about 50,000 young people a year, and that's a huge number. And I think, you know, we need to recognise that we're failing a vast number of young people every year who go on to these programmes. Many of them will drop out. Many of them will end up in what we call churn, so periods of being unemployed, periods of being on benefits, and periods of doing other probably short, low-level vet programmes which don't really lead anywhere. And for me, that's my burning issue. It's trying to do something about that. But as I say, overarching that is the whole issue of inequality in education more broadly, and what we can do to make the system more accessible and more meaningful to a larger number of young people.
Thank you, Liz. That's wonderful advice, and I will be taking notice of what you've just said, because you've been, you know, a wonderful mentor and a really well recognised professional in the research community, both in Australia and in the UK. And you know, I think that you've been a very generous mentor to many people. So I think that we're very lucky to be able to have you here to present this recording, which people will be able to watch again and again. There's some really great advice in here, and of course, you know, if people would like to know more about the research methods that you've used, and yourself, and of course Vicky, your co-author, they can access a copy of the book, which we should mention again, because it's my favourite book of the year. at the moment. So this is the book, Research Methods for Social Justice and Equity in Education. And I, for one, will be using this as a bit of a Bible, and I've recommended it to many students already. So I thank you for writing it. Thanks to you and Vicky for taking the time to write that. It's also an excellent resource for, you know, diving deeper into other perspectives, because you've got a wonderful wealth of references in there as well. So it's almost like the source book for education, social justice research. Now, before we leave, everybody, is there anything else that you would like to add that we haven't touched on, or any other words of wisdom that you think people, that you would really like us to know?
Oh goodness, now you really have put me on the spot. I can't think of anything that I would want to add, except to say thank you very much for all your kind words. It's very nice to sit here and have somebody say nice things about you. I'm really happy, and I know Vicky is too, to discuss the issues that we raise in the book. So if anybody watching this is interested, they're, you know, really welcome to email me, and if they look me up on Derby University website, they can find my email there and just get in touch. And yeah, I'm really happy to discuss these issues. And I'm just really sorry that I couldn't be in Australia to do this in person, but you know, there's COVID for you, and hopefully I'll be back there in the non too distant future.